I don't mind you incorporating it in the story, but when you try to incorporate it as a theme in a personal statement, and Dr. Gray has said this, and I agree with him, you don't need a theme. This is your story. Hello and welcome to another episode of PS or BS, where you submit your personal statement and we review it and tell you whether it's hitting the right marks or if you have to really do some additional work to get your point across of why you're interested in medicine. I'm Carlos Tapia and we'll jump right into it here. So let's jump into his personal statement. I want to make sure that we start here right. What you can see here is the description of a personal story about their great grandmother, right? Really explaining what their culture is, who their grandmother was, the personal struggle that really is leading this individual to medicine and on the track to becoming a future physician. This is the spark, this is the seed, this is where it all began. I love this story. I enjoyed this story. I really got to know the individual at a very personal level. Here's the struggle that I'm having with this. It's that it's very lengthy. I appreciate the narrative. I appreciate the story, but there is a way to do it in a personal statement where you can hit all the high level marks that you need to hit to then convey right where you're going with this story and why you're interested in medicine. It wasn't until maybe the third paragraph that I really got the sense from the individual writer as to, okay, this is why I want to go into medicine, or them even stating this is why I want to go into medicine. And so I was really impressed by the story again, but it's too lengthy. It needs to be condensed a lot. And you can do this and you can get that sort of point across of that seed in a much shorter length. As we move on, there is some general language here about talking about understanding healthcare, how the systematic barriers can shape the ways that people face healthcare. They see patients' struggles to understood, even though there's well-intentioned. Eyewitness how subtle and over assumptions that erode trust for their daily interactions tremendously affecting care. Learning about disparities like Black mortality rate reinforced my commitment to learn more from these inequalities or inequities. My thing here was, where can you really show me through all of this, right? Like, where can you really show me an example of where you saw this, where you witnessed this? I know you had a personal connection and I see that. But then using general statements about inequities and personal struggles without really giving us any context or an example can land flat. And here it's landing flat. Here it's landing a little bit as if you're like wanting people to know that you understand inequities, which is perfectly fine, but it's just not landing. It would land better with this reflection if there was a patient interaction or a personal connection and you're conveying that right and showing us through the story. An example would be better than just trying to just say these things and make it seem like you understand this from the point of medicine. And again, buzzwords, right? They represent real life, the front edge of a system in need of repair. We understand that, right? You don't need to restate that. And again, it's sounding kind of buzzy, trying to grab the attention of the reader without really connecting it to your own personal story in the narrative. Then we talk about transitioning into their own personal experiences within the healthcare system, right? They found research in reproductive health advocacy. That was like the foray into trying to understand themselves. Okay, now this is different. Your personal experience, personal connection. But then it was very general, like very generalized. All of the population that you study, all of their emotional needs can go unrecognized. Working with Planned Parenthood underscore the importance of access to care. Again, no personal connection, no clinical story, no patient story. Very generalized. It needs to connect to you. This is your personal story. How does it connect to you? Adding your own narrative, your own stories, right? The reflections are there. You just need to refine them a little bit. And we go on, right? Talk about a personal involvement in student government, diversity of our narrative, a youth-led organization for more inclusive curricula, reinforce commitments to drive the bridge of personal systemic change. No specific example. It's just very general, deep in my awareness of how large systems influence the access and opportunity. Again, better landing if there was a personal connection or a clinical story. Medicine unites these perspectives, allow me to form connections. And my question here was, how does it unite? You're not showing us anything other than telling us. And again, it sounds buzzwordy. Like you're writing this from a very narrative perspective driven to grab the attention of the reader and keep the reader engaged without really showcasing as how you're seeing this, how this is playing out in your story to becoming a future physician. And then the personal statement, right? I think the big thing for me is I love the reflection. I love how you envision yourself, seeing yourself as a physician in the future, using what you learned and what you discovered in the path towards becoming a physician. But the way this personal statement is written, it doesn't land because you've referenced a lot how medicine unites the passion for advocacy, drive to access, address systematic inequities, commitment to earning patients' trust. But again, it wasn't shown through that personal statement through any of the stories. It was, again, very buzzwordy, very generalizing topics and subjects. So I would encourage you to add your own personal connection and your own personal story in order for the personal statement to convey your story of why you're going into medicine. You started off on the right path, but I think it needs a little bit more improvement. Overall, again, I see the personal connection, why you want to go into medicine, but it's a very long story. Shorten it down. It almost felt like you're trying to incorporate this topic of underserved populations of patients. It's just not landing because you're just talking about it more from a buzzword perspective and not showing your direct patient interactions. I feel like your personal statement is full of attention-grabbing phrases and narrative, but there's not enough substance here to really tell us why you want to become a doctor, why you're on this path. This path is not for the faint of heart. And so you really have to show that to admissions committee and demonstrate to them why you're wanting to do this. Don't generalize statement. Again, I think the last thing that I will mention is it felt very thematic, like your theme was going to talk a lot about the underserved population. And if you did work with those populations, I don't mind you incorporating it in the story, but when you try to incorporate it as a theme in a personal statement, and Dr. Gray has said this, and I agree with him, you don't need a theme. This is your story. Your story through medicine is not a theme. It's your personal story. So even if you don't incorporate, even if you're talking about inequities in some parts of your personal statement, it doesn't mean you have to include this theme and this topic throughout all of it for it to land. At the end of the day, you're not writing a personal statement, I think, to really say, look, all the work that I've done with underserved populations and the inequities that exist in the healthcare system, this is your story of your path towards medicine. So there's a fine line where you actually work with these populations and you use your stories for examples and to highlight and mention your reflection. But when you try to incorporate it as a theme, this is a perfect example of it's gone too far. It's not landing your story. It feels more like it's just buzzwordy and narrative and attention grabbing. And coming off from the perspective of, look, I work with this population, so therefore I understand them better than anybody else. And so you have to be very cautious with that. Again, my personal feedback on this essay, I hope that you take it. I hope that you take some time to really review this and rewrite some of this stuff. And I think you started on the right path. You just need a little bit more work. And then hopefully it'll be a good personal statement. I hope this was insightful. Let us know how further we can help. We were happy to review your personal statement. Thank you.